Maya stood outside the restaurant, her stomach twisting with hunger. It had been 2 days since she'd eaten anything more than a stale bagel someone left on a bench. The evening air carried the smell of garlic bread and tomato sauce from inside, making her mouth water. She was only 16, but the past 3 months had aged her in ways that didn't show on her face. Her clothes were wrinkled and dirty. Her hair, once shiny and well-kept, now hung in tangles she tried to hide under a hoodie. The backpack on her shoulders held everything she owned in this world. Inside that backpack was a photograph. It was creased and faded now, but she looked at it every night before trying to sleep in whatever safe corner she could find. The photo showed her father on stage at a grand concert hall, his hands floating over piano keys, his face lit up with pure joy. That was 12 years ago, back when he was still alive, back when people filled auditoriums just to hear him play. Maya barely remembered those days. She was only 4 when her father died in a car accident. Her mother had tried to keep things together afterward, working 2 jobs, making sure Maya had food and a roof over her head. But then the medical bills started piling up. Cancer doesn't care about single mothers or young girls who've already lost one parent. It just takes and takes until there's nothing left. 3 months ago, her mother passed away in a hospital bed, holding Maya's hand and whispering that everything would be okay. But everything wasn't okay. The hospital bills, the funeral costs, the back rent they owed, it all added up to more than they had. The landlord took what little furniture they owned. The state said Maya was almost an adult and the foster system was full anyway. They gave her 2 weeks in a temporary shelter. And then she was on her own. Now here she was, standing outside a fancy Italian restaurant called Giovanni's, trying to find the courage to walk around back and ask a question that might get her laughed at. Again. She'd noticed the piano through the window 3 days ago while walking past. It sat in the corner of the dining room, dusty and ignored. Most restaurants didn't have live music anymore, but this one had kept its piano, probably for decoration. Maya had been watching the place since then, learning the patterns, figuring out when the manager came out back. Her father had taught her to play when she was little. After he died, her mother couldn't afford lessons, but Maya practiced whenever she could find a piano. School music rooms during lunch, the community center before it closed down. She wasn't formally trained, but music was the one thing that still connected her to her father, the one thing she was actually good at. Taking a deep breath, Maya walked around to the back of the restaurant. The alley smelled like garbage and dish soap. A heavy-set man in his 40s was hauling trash bags to the dumpster. His name tag read Tony, manager. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice coming out smaller than she wanted. Tony looked up, his eyes sweeping over her with immediate judgment. She saw it happen in his face, that shift from neutral to dismissive. He'd sized her up in 2 seconds and found her lacking. "We're not hiring," he said, turning back to his work. "No, I saw you have a piano inside. I was wondering if I could play it." The words tumbled out fast. "Just for dinner. I could play during the dinner service and you could give me a meal. I'm really good, I promise." Tony stopped and stared at her. Then he laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. "You play our piano?" The back door swung open and 2 cooks stuck their heads out, drawn by Tony's loud voice. "What's going on?" one of them asked. "This kid wants to play our piano for food," Tony said, gesturing at Maya like she was part of a joke. The cooks looked her up and down. One of them, a younger guy with tattoos on his arms, smirked. "Does she even know which end of the piano is which? Probably saw it in a movie once and thinks she can play," the other cook added. They both laughed. Maya's face burned hot with shame, but desperation pushed her forward. "My father was David Chen. He was a concert pianist. He taught me when I was little. I really can play, I just need a chance." Tony's laughter got louder. "Oh, sure. And my uncle is Beethoven. Listen, kid, I don't know what your situation is, but this is a business. We have professional musicians who play here on weekends. We can't just let random people off the street touch our stuff." "It's been sitting there unused," Maya said, her voice shaking now. "I saw through the window. It has dust on it. I just need to eat something, please." "Not my problem," Tony said, his voice hardening. "Now get out of here before I call the cops. We don't need people like you hanging around. Bad for business, people like you." The words hit Maya in the chest. She knew what he meant, homeless, dirty, desperate. In 3 months, she'd gone from being a regular kid with a home and a mother who loved her to being someone people crossed the street to avoid. The younger cook pulled out his phone. "Should I film this?" Might be funny if she actually tries to play. Maya felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She was about to turn away when a voice cut through the mockery. What exactly is going on here? Everyone turned. An elderly woman was stepping out of a sleek black car that had just pulled up. She wore an elegant coat and carried herself with the kind of presence that made people pay attention. Her driver stood by the car door waiting. "Mrs. Romano," Tony said, his whole attitude changing in an instant. He straightened up, the mocking smile disappearing. "Just handling a situation. Nothing to worry about." The woman, Mrs. Romano apparently, looked at Maya with sharp but not unkind eyes. I heard raised voices. And laughter. The unkind sort. "This girl wanted to play our piano for food," Tony explained, trying to sound reasonable now. "I was just explaining that we cannot what? Let someone demonstrate their talent?" Mrs. Romano stepped closer, studying Maya's face. "You said your father was David Chen?" Maya nodded, surprised the woman had heard. "Yes, ma'am. He died when I was 4, but he taught me to play before that, and I've been practicing ever since whenever I could find a piano." Mrs. Romano was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, like she was remembering something from long ago. "I heard David Chen play once, in New York many years ago. He was extraordinary, had a way of making the piano sing." "That's what my mother always said," Maya whispered. The older woman made a decision. "Come inside, play something. If you can actually play, you'll have your meal. If you cannot, you leave quietly and do not come back. Fair?" Tony started to protest. "Mrs. Romano, we can't just—" "It's my restaurant, Antonio," she said firmly. "I believe I can decide who plays the piano that I purchased. Now everyone inside. Let's see what this young woman can do." Maya's hands were shaking as she followed Mrs. Romano through the back door. The kitchen staff watched her walk past, their expressions ranging from amused to skeptical. Someone definitely had their phone out now, ready to record whatever embarrassment was about to happen. They walked through the kitchen into the dining room. Several customers looked up, curious about the commotion. The piano sat in the corner, just as Maya had seen through the window. Up close, it looked even worse. The wood was scratched. The keys were yellowed. Dust covered the top like a blanket. "Well," Tony said, crossing his arms. "Let's see this talent." Maya set her backpack down and approached the piano. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it, her one chance. If she failed, she'd be out on the street again with nothing. If she succeeded, she might actually eat tonight. She sat down on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. They felt sticky and strange under her touch. The piano was out of tune. She could tell immediately. But her father had taught her to work with what she had, not what she wished for. Maya closed her eyes and thought of her father's hands guiding hers. She thought of her mother humming along while she practiced on their old keyboard. She thought of every moment music had been the one good thing in her life. And then she began to play. The first notes came out hesitant, searching. Maya's fingers found their way across the yellowed keys, adjusting for the ones that stuck, compensating for the ones that were out of tune. She'd chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece her father had loved most. It was the same piece he'd played at her 4th birthday party, right before the accident. The same piece her mother had requested during her final days in the hospital, asking Maya to hum it when she was too weak to speak. Every note carried a memory, and Maya let those memories guide her hands. The sticky keys didn't matter anymore. The dust, the scratches, the imperfect tuning, none of it mattered. Maya wasn't just playing notes on a page. She was pouring everything she'd felt over the past 3 months into this moment. The fear of sleeping on cold streets, the shame of being invisible, the grief of losing everyone who'd ever loved her. And underneath it all, the stubborn hope that had kept her alive when giving up would have been easier. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Tony's arms slowly uncrossed. His mouth, which had been set in a smug line, fell open slightly. The cook who'd been holding up his phone to record had lowered it, watching with wide eyes instead. Customers who'd been cutting their pasta mid-bite had stopped moving. A woman in a red dress had her hand pressed to her chest. An older man was blinking rapidly like he was trying not to cry. The waitress near the kitchen door stood frozen with a tray of drinks, afraid to move and break the spell. Mrs. Romano had taken a seat at the nearest table. Her elegant hands were folded in her lap. but Maya could see them trembling slightly. The older woman's eyes were closed and tears were streaming down her cheeks. Maya played through the middle section where the melody turned darker, more complex. Her father used to say this part was about accepting sadness without letting it destroy you. At 4 years old, she hadn't understood. At 16, homeless and hungry, she understood completely. The music swelled and fell, climbed and descended. Maya's whole body moved with it, swaying slightly as her fingers danced across the keys. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore. She wasn't thinking at all. She was just feeling, and letting that feeling become sound. As she approached the final section, Maya thought about what this meal would mean. Not just food, though her stomach still ached with hunger. It meant someone had given her a chance. Someone had looked past the dirty clothes and the desperate eyes and seen something worth listening to. Maybe that mattered even more than the food. The last notes faded into silence. Maya's hands remained on the keys for a moment longer, like she couldn't quite let go. Then she lifted them and placed them in her lap, suddenly aware of how badly they were shaking. For several seconds, nobody moved. The silence stretched out and Maya felt panic rising in her chest. Had it not been good enough? Had they hated it? Was Tony about to laugh again? Then Mrs. Romano stood up and started clapping. Her applause echoed through the quiet restaurant, and then everyone joined in. The customers were on their feet. The kitchen staff came rushing out, applauding too. Even Tony was clapping, though he looked like someone had just slapped him awake from a deep sleep. "Brava," Mrs. Romano said, her voice thick with emotion. She walked over to Maya and gently took both of her hands. "Brava, child. That was extraordinary." Maya couldn't hold back anymore. The tears she'd been fighting since Tony first laughed at her came pouring out. She stood there in front of all these strangers, crying and trying to catch her breath, while Mrs. Romano held her hands like she was something precious. "I'm sorry," Maya managed to say. "I'm sorry, No apologies," Mrs. Romano said firmly. "None. You have nothing to apologize for." "Antonio." Tony practically jumped. "Yes, Mrs. Romano? This young woman will have whatever she wants from our kitchen. Our very best. And she will eat in the main dining room, not hidden away somewhere. Do you understand?" "Of course, yes, absolutely," Tony stammered. He looked at Maya with a completely different expression now. I'm sorry for what I said outside. I was wrong." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. She just wanted to sit down before her legs gave out. Mrs. Romano guided her to a table near the window and pulled out a chair like Maya was an honored guest instead of a homeless teenager. "Sit, please. Catch your breath, Carlo." She gestured to one of the waiters. "Bring water, bread, and then ask Chef Roberto what his finest dish is tonight. Spare nothing." As Maya sat, she noticed the other customers were still watching her, but it was different now. They weren't looking at her like she was a problem to be solved or an eyesore to be removed. They were looking at her with respect. Several people nodded at her as they returned to their own tables. The woman in the red dress came over. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you for sharing it with us." Maya could only nod, overwhelmed. The waiter brought water, and she drank it so fast she nearly choked. The bread came next, warm and soft with butter that melted into it. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though everything in her body screamed to shove it all in her mouth at once. Mrs. Romano sat across from her, watching with kind eyes. "Your father really was David Chen?" "Yes, ma'am." Maya pulled the photograph from her backpack with shaking hands. This was him, at Carnegie Hall. Mrs. Romano studied the photo carefully. "I remember that night. He played Rachmaninoff." The entire audience stood for 10 minutes after. 10 full minutes. She looked up at Maya. "You have his gift, but you have something else too. Something I heard in your playing tonight. Pain, yes, but also survival. Your father played with joy. You play with necessity. It's different. Not worse. Just different." The food started arriving. Pasta with meat sauce, fresh salad, soup, bread pudding for dessert. Maya ate carefully, trying to have manners even though she wanted to inhale everything. Mrs. Romano sat with her the whole time, asking gentle questions. That's when Maya's story came out. Her mother's death, the bills, the streets, the shelters that were full, the parks where she tried to sleep, the libraries where she spent her days pretending to be a normal kid doing homework. 3 months of fear and loneliness and hunger. Mrs. Romano listened to all of it without interrupting. When Maya finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something Maya wasn't expecting. "How would you feel about playing here 3 nights a week?" Maya's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "What? 3 nights a week? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Our busiest nights. You play during dinner service. 2 hours each night." Mrs. Romano's eyes were serious. "I will pay you fairly. Enough for food, certainly. And there's an apartment above this restaurant. Small but clean. My nephew lived there before he moved. It's been empty for 2 months. You may stay there." Maya couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Mrs. Romano reached across the table and covered Maya's hand with her own. "Because 40 years ago I was a young singer trying to make it in New York. I was talented, yes, but I was also poor and alone. And someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. They saw past my circumstances and saw my potential. That chance changed my entire life." She squeezed Maya's hand. "Now I'm old and I have money and I have this restaurant. What good is any of it if I can't pass along the kindness that was given to me? But you don't even know me," Maya said, tears streaming down her face again. "I know enough. I know you can play. I know you're honest enough to ask for work instead of stealing. I know you've survived 3 months on the streets and still have enough spirit left to walk into a restaurant and ask for a chance." Mrs. Romano smiled. "That tells me everything I need to know." Maya looked around the restaurant. Tony was watching from near the kitchen, looking ashamed. The cooks had their heads together, whispering. The customers were enjoying their meals again, but several kept glancing over at her with warm expressions. "I'll work hard," Maya said, her voice cracking. "I promise. I'll practice every day. I'll make you proud." I know you will," Mrs. Romano said simply. "Now finish your dessert, then let me show you your new home." That night, Maya climbed the stairs to the small apartment above Giovanni's. It had a bed, a bathroom, a tiny kitchen, and a window overlooking the street. After 3 months of sleeping in doorways and under bridges, it looked like a palace. She set her backpack on the bed and pulled out her father's photograph. Looking at his smiling face, she whispered, "I did it, Dad, I played." And someone listened. For the first time in 3 months, Maya fell asleep in a real bed in a safe place with a full stomach. And for the first time since her mother died, she had hope that tomorrow might actually be okay. The first week at Giovanni's felt like living in a dream Maya was afraid to wake up from. Every morning she'd open her eyes in the small apartment and spend a few seconds convinced it was all fake, that she'd actually wake up on a park bench somewhere, cold and hungry again. But then she'd hear the sounds of the restaurant below preparing for lunch service, and she'd remember it was real. Mrs. Romano had been serious about everything. Maya played Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. 2 hours each evening, from 7 to 9, right when the dining room was fullest. The piano had been professionally tuned, cleaned, and polished until it shone. It wasn't a concert grand, but it was 1,000 times better than the dusty, broken instrument she'd first played. The money Mrs. Romano paid her seemed like a fortune. It was enough for food, clothes, and still have some left over to save. Maya bought a notebook and started keeping track of every dollar, terrified of somehow ending up back on the streets. But the hardest part wasn't the playing. It was learning to trust again. Tony tried to make things right. He'd bring her meals from the kitchen, always apologizing, always trying too hard. "I misjudged you," he'd say. "I'm really sorry about that first day. I should have given you a chance." Maya would nod and accept the food, but she couldn't forget how he'd laughed, how he'd looked at her like she was trash. Words like "I'm sorry" were easy. They didn't erase the memory of humiliation. The kitchen staff was the same way. The young cook who'd wanted to film her embarrassment now went out of his way to be friendly. "Hey Maya, killer performance last night," he'd say. "You're really talented." She'd smile and say thank you, but inside she wondered if he'd be friendly if she showed up dirty and desperate again. Probably not. Only Mrs. Romano felt completely genuine. The older woman would sit in the restaurant during Maya's performances, always at the same table, always with that same look of peaceful contentment on her face. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and sway gently to the music. After each performance, she'd simply nod at Maya with a warm smile. No excessive praise, no pity, just acknowledgement between two people who understood music. By the third week, word had spread beyond the regular customers. People started coming specifically to hear Maya play. The restaurant got busier. Reservations had to be made days in advance for Friday and Saturday nights. Tony looked thrilled with the business, but Maya felt the weight of expectations growing heavier. What if she had a bad night? What if people got tired of hearing her? What if Mrs. Romano decided she wasn't worth the trouble anymore? The anxiety kept her up at night, staring at the ceiling of her little apartment, playing through worst-case scenarios in her mind. Then, on a Sunday evening in late October, everything changed again. Maya was halfway through her second set, playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, when she noticed a man sitting alone near the back. He was in his 60s, well-dressed in a dark suit, and he wasn't eating. He was just watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She'd gotten used to people watching while she played, but this felt different, like he was studying her, analyzing every movement of her hands. When she finished her set and stood to take her usual break, the man approached. Up close, he had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but there was something sad in his expression, too. "Excuse me," he said. "Your name is Maya Chen?" She tensed immediately. Nobody here knew her last name except Mrs. Romano. She'd been careful about that, afraid somehow that being David Chen's daughter would make people expect more than she could give. "Who's asking?" Maya said, taking a step back. "My name is Richard Webb. I was your father's best friend." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. It was old, probably from the 90s. Two young men stood together, arms around each other's shoulders, laughing. One of them was unmistakably her father, younger than in the Carnegie Hall photo, but with the same bright smile. Maya's heart started pounding. "I don't understand. How did you find me?" "I've been looking for you for 2 years," Richard said quietly. "Ever since I heard about your mother's passing. I tried to contact you through the address I had, but you'd already been evicted. The hospitals, the social services. Nobody would tell me anything because of privacy laws. Then last week, a friend sent me a video someone posted online. You playing here. I recognized your father's technique immediately." Maya remembered the phones that had been recording that first night. Of course someone had posted it online. She'd been so focused on survival she hadn't even thought about it. "What do you want?" Maya asked, still wary. "People wanted things. They always wanted something. To talk," Richard said simply. "About your father. About what you're owed. May I sit?" They moved to a quiet corner booth. Mrs. Romano, watching from across the room, caught Maya's eye with a questioning look. Maya nodded slightly that it was okay. Richard ordered coffee he didn't drink. Instead, he pulled out a folder from his briefcase and set it on the table between them. "After your father died, several things were put in place," he began. His life insurance policy, royalties from his recordings, and a trust fund that was established by some of his wealthy students and patrons. The total amount was around $200,000, all designated for you. Maya's breath caught. "What? No, that's not—" "I never heard anything about that." "Your mother knew," Richard said gently, "but she was going through something after your father's death. Grief, depression, I don't know exactly. She cut ties with everyone from your father's world, moved across the country, changed her number. I think seeing all of us just reminded her too much of what she'd lost. So where's the money?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tied up in legal complications. Your mother was the trustee, but when she became ill, things got messy. Medical bills, debt collectors, lawyers who didn't care about doing their job right. The trust was frozen during probate. But I'm a lawyer, Maya. I've been working on unfreezing it since I found out what happened. And as of 3 days ago, I succeeded." He pushed the folder toward her. Inside were legal documents Maya didn't fully understand, but she could see her name. And numbers. "Big numbers. This is real?" she whispered. "Completely real. The money is yours. It always was." Richard leaned forward. "But there's something else. Something I think matters even more than the money." He pulled out another folder, this one thicker. Inside were dozens of sheets of paper covered in handwritten musical notation. Her father's handwriting. She recognized it from the few pieces of sheet music her mother had kept. "These are your father's compositions. Original works he wrote but never performed publicly. Some he was working on right before he died. They've been in a storage unit all these years, along with his personal effects. Letters, journals, photographs. Your mother paid for the storage for years, but after she died, I took over the payments. I couldn't let your father's legacy disappear." Maya's hands trembled as she touched the papers. These were pieces of her father she'd never known existed. Music he'd created, sitting alone somewhere pouring his heart onto these pages. And now they were here in front of her. Why are you giving me all this? She asked. You could have kept it, sold it. The compositions alone must be worth something. Richard smiled sadly. Because your father was my best friend. And because the last conversation I had with him, 2 days before he died, he told me about you. How you'd started showing interest in the piano. How your little fingers would try to copy what he did. He said, Richard, I think she's got it. Real talent. I can't wait to teach her everything I know. Richard's voice cracked slightly. He never got that chance. But maybe in a way he still can. These compositions, they're part of him. They're your inheritance, not just the money. They're your connection to who he was as an artist. Maya couldn't stop the tears. They came hard and fast, years of grief finally finding a release. Richard handed her a napkin and waited patiently while she cried. Mrs. Romano appeared at the table with a tray. Tea for Maya, fresh coffee for Richard, and a knowing look that said she'd sensed something important was happening. Take your time. Here, she said softly to Maya. The piano can wait tonight. But Maya shook her head. She wiped her eyes and looked at Richard.
Can you stay?
I want to try playing one of these. Right now. Richard looked surprised. Are you sure? They're sight-reading pieces. Some are quite complex. I want to try, Maya insisted. He wrote them. I should play them. They moved back to the piano. Maya chose a piece titled For Tomorrow. The notation was dense, challenging, full of her father's distinctive style. She took a deep breath and began to play. It was messy. She made mistakes, had to stop and start several times. But underneath the imperfection, she could hear what her father had intended. The hope in the melody, the complexity in the harmony, the story he was trying to tell. When she finished, the restaurant was silent again. Richard was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. He would be so proud of you, he said, so incredibly proud. That night after the restaurant closed, Maya sat in her apartment surrounded by her father's papers. She read his journals, looked at photographs of him as a young man full of dreams, read his letters, including ones he'd written to her for birthdays she'd never celebrated with him. In one letter, meant to be opened on her 16th birthday, he'd written, The world will test you, Maya. People will doubt you. They'll judge you by what they see on the outside. But real talent doesn't need permission to shine. It just needs a chance and the courage to take it. Maya looked around her small apartment, at the life she'd rebuilt from nothing, at the chance Mrs. Romano had given her, at the inheritance from a father she barely remembered but who'd loved her enough to plan for her future. She finally understood what she wanted to do. She didn't just want to survive anymore. She wanted to make something beautiful, something that mattered, something that would honor everyone who'd believed in her when she had nothing. But first, she had a lot of work to do. Maya spent the next 3 weeks completely absorbed in her father's compositions. Every free moment she was at the piano, working through the pieces he'd written. Some were gentle and melodic. Others were complex and challenging, full of unexpected rhythms and harmonies that took hours to master. Richard came by the restaurant twice a week, always sitting in the same spot, listening as Maya practiced. He'd tell her stories about her father, how David would work on a single measure for days until it felt right, how he'd play for hours, lost in the music, forgetting to eat or sleep, how he'd light up when talking about the daughter he loved so much. These stories filled in gaps Maya hadn't even known existed. Her memories of her father were so faint, just fragments of feelings more than actual events. But through Richard's words and her father's music, she was getting to know him in a way she never had before. The money from the trust fund had been transferred to an account in her name. Maya stared at the balance on her phone for 20 minutes the first time she checked it. She'd never seen that many numbers before. It was enough to change everything. Enough to go to college, to live comfortably, to never worry about being homeless again. But it also terrified her. Money disappeared. She'd seen it happen with her mother. Medical bills had swallowed their savings in months. What if Maya made a mistake? What if she lost it all? Mrs. Romano found her one afternoon sitting at a back table, staring at her phone with an anxious expression. What troubles you, child? The older woman asked, sitting down across from her. Maya showed her the account balance. I don't know what to do with it. I'm scared I'll mess it up somehow, Mrs. Romano smiled. Money is a tool, nothing more. The question is what you want to build with it. I want to play my father's music, Maya said immediately. Really play it. Not just here, but on real stages. I want people to hear what he created, Then that's what you should do, Mrs. Romano said simply. But I'm not good enough, Maya admitted, the words tasting bitter. I can play, yes, but I was never formally trained. My father taught me when I was tiny, and after that I just figured things out on my own. These compositions he wrote, they're incredible. They deserve someone better than me. Mrs. Romano was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have a friend. Her name is Professor Helen Rodriguez. She teaches at the conservatory downtown. She's very selective about her students, very demanding, but she's also the best piano instructor in the state. Would you like me to arrange a meeting? Maya's first instinct was to say no. The conservatory was for real musicians, people who'd been training since they were children, people who could read music perfectly and had technique that Maya could only dream of. She didn't belong there, but then she thought about her father's letter, about not needing permission to shine, about having the courage to take chances. Yes, she said, please. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. Maya barely slept the night before. She kept running through her father's pieces in her head, worried she'd forget everything the moment she sat down at the piano. The conservatory was an old brick building downtown, with high ceilings and the sound of music drifting from every room. Students hurried past with instrument cases, talking in a language of sharps and flats that Maya only partially understood. She felt completely out of place. Professor Rodriguez's office was on the 3rd floor. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper demeanor. She didn't smile when Maya walked in. So you're the girl everyone's talking about, she said, looking Maya up and down. The one who plays at Giovanni's. Yes, ma'am, Maya said quietly. Sophia called me. Said you have raw talent but need training. She said you're working on your father's compositions. David Chen's daughter. Professor Rodriguez's expression didn't reveal what she thought about any of this. I looked up your father. He was quite accomplished. But that doesn't tell me anything about you. Talent isn't genetic. Discipline is what matters. She gestured to a beautiful grand piano in the corner of her office. Play something. One of your father's pieces, if you'd like. Maya sat down, her hands shaking slightly. She chose for tomorrow, the first piece she'd played from her father's collection. She'd practiced it hundreds of times by now, but under Professor Rodriguez's cold gaze, every note felt like a test she might fail. She played through it, making only a few minor mistakes. When she finished, she waited for a response. Professor Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. Then she said, your technique is terrible. Your posture is wrong. Your hand position would make any serious instructor cry. You're self-taught and it shows. Maya's heart sank. However, Professor Rodriguez continued, you have something that can't be taught. You understand the music. You feel it. Most of my students can play the notes perfectly, but they don't understand what the notes mean. You do. She stood and walked to her desk, pulling out a thick folder. This is my curriculum. It's designed for students who've been training for years. It will be twice as hard for you because we'll have to break all your bad habits first. You'll practice 4 hours a day minimum. You'll study music theory, composition, and performance. You'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life. Maya swallowed hard. And then what? And then, if you survive my training, we'll talk about arranging a proper concert. A tribute to your father's work. Something worthy of his legacy. Professor Rodriguez fixed her with a stern look. But I don't accept quitters. If you start this, you finish it. Understood? Yes, ma'am, Maya said. Good, we start Monday. 9 in the morning. Don't be late. The next 6 months were the hardest of Maya's life, and that included living on the streets. Professor Rodriguez hadn't been exaggerating. The training was brutal. Every morning at 9, Maya was at the conservatory. Professor Rodriguez would tear apart everything she thought she knew about playing piano. Her finger position was wrong. Her pedal work was sloppy. Her understanding of music theory had massive gaps. Everything needed to be rebuilt from scratch. Again, Professor Rodriguez would say over and over and over. Wrong. Again. Better, but still not right. Again. Some days Maya wanted to quit. She'd go back to her apartment above Giovanni's and cry from frustration. Her hands hurt. Her back hurt from maintaining proper posture. Her brain hurt from trying to understand complex theoretical concepts she'd never learned. But she kept going. She still played at Giovanni's on weekend nights, and those performances became her refuge. There, she could play with feeling instead of technical precision. There, Mrs. Romano would smile at her with warmth instead of critical analysis. There, the customers clapped because they enjoyed the music. not because she'd finally executed a difficult passage correctly. Richard visited often, always encouraging. "Your father went through this too," he'd remind her. "He worked with a teacher who was just as demanding. It nearly broke him, but he said it was worth it in the end." Slowly, painfully, Maya improved. Her technique got cleaner. The bad habits started falling away. She began to understand the theory behind what she'd been doing instinctively. Professor Rodriguez's criticisms became slightly less harsh, which Maya learned was the closest thing to praise she'd ever give. By the 6th month, something clicked. Maya was working on one of her father's most complex pieces, a composition called Between Light and Shadow. It was full of rapid transitions between major and minor keys, demanding both technical precision and emotional depth. She'd been struggling with a particular section for weeks, but on this day her hands just knew what to do. The notes flowed naturally. The emotion was there, but now it was supported by solid technique instead of fighting against her limitations. When she finished, Professor Rodriguez actually smiled. It was tiny, barely there, but it was real. "Finally," she said. "You're ready." "Ready for what?" Maya asked. "To share your father's music with the world. I've been making arrangements. We've secured Benaroya Hall for a concert in 2 months. It's Seattle's premier venue, 2,000 seats." Professor Rodriguez's expression turned serious again. "This is your chance, Maya. Not just to play, but to introduce your father's lost works to the world. To establish yourself as a serious artist. Are you ready for that?" Maya thought about the hungry girl who'd stood outside Giovanni's 8 months ago. The one everyone had laughed at. The one who'd had nothing but a photograph and a desperate hope. She thought about Mrs. Romano, who'd given her a chance when she had no reason to. About Richard, who'd spent years searching for her to give her what was rightfully hers. About Professor Rodriguez, who'd pushed her harder than anyone ever had because she believed Maya could handle it. And she thought about her father, who'd written beautiful music and never got to hear it performed, who'd died believing his daughter had talent worth nurturing. "Yes," Maya said firmly. "I'm ready," Professor Rodriguez nodded. "Good. Because from now until that concert, we're going to work even harder. This performance needs to be perfect. No, better than perfect. It needs to be unforgettable." Maya stood up from the piano, her hands still tingling from playing. "Then let's get started." For the first time in her life, she felt like she knew exactly where she was going. The path ahead was still difficult, still uncertain, but it was hers, and she was going to walk it all the way to the end. The night before the concert, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment above Giovanni's, staring at the ceiling, running through every piece in her head. What if she forgot the notes? What if her hands froze up? What if people came expecting a miracle and left disappointed? At 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The restaurant was dark and quiet. She sat at the piano where everything had started 10 months ago, and just pressed her hands against the keys without playing. Can't sleep either. Maya turned to find Mrs. Romano sitting at her usual table wrapped in a silk robe. "I didn't know you were here," Maya said. "I live in the building next door. Old people don't sleep much." Mrs. Romano smiled. "And I wanted to be close tonight, in case you needed someone." Maya felt tears threatening. "What if I mess up tomorrow? What if I'm not good enough?" Mrs. Romano stood and walked over, sitting on the bench beside Maya. "Do you remember the first night you played here? This piano was out of tune. The keys stuck. You were hungry and scared, and everyone was waiting for you to fail." "I remember," Maya whispered. "And you played anyway. You played beautifully. Not because the circumstances were perfect, but because the music was inside you and needed to come out." Mrs. Romano took Maya's hand. "That hasn't changed. Tomorrow you'll walk onto a bigger stage with a better piano, but the music is still the same. Your father's heart flowing through your fingers. That's all anyone needs to hear." Maya leaned her head on Mrs. Romano's shoulder. "Thank you for everything. For giving me a chance when no one else would. You gave yourself the chance, dear. You were brave enough to ask for it. I just opened the door." The next evening, Maya stood backstage at Benaroya Hall, wearing a deep blue dress that Mrs. Romano had bought for her. She could hear the murmur of 2,000 people taking their seats. The concert hall was completely sold out. Richard had worked with local media to tell Maya's story. Not all of it, not the painful details, but enough. A teenage girl, daughter of a forgotten piano genius bringing her father's lost compositions to the world. The story had captured people's imagination. Professor Rodriguez appeared beside her, looking elegant in a black evening gown. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Maya admitted. "Good, that means you care." Professor Rodriguez adjusted Maya's dress slightly. "Remember everything I taught you. But more importantly, remember why you're doing this. This isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about honoring your father's work. Keep that in your heart, and your hands will follow." Tony and the staff from Giovanni's had come. They were sitting together in the middle section, Tony in a suit that looked uncomfortable on him. When he'd asked if they could come, he'd said, "We want to see how far you've come, and to apologize properly by showing up for you." Maya had forgiven him finally. Not because what he'd done was okay, but because holding on to anger was exhausting. People could change. People could grow. She was proof of that. Mrs. Romano was in the front row, of course. Richard sat beside her. They'd become friends over the past months, bonding over their shared love for Maya's father and their determination to help Maya succeed. The stage manager gave her a 5-minute warning. Maya closed her eyes and thought about her mother. About sitting by her hospital bed, humming the melodies her father used to play. Her mother's last words had been, "Play something beautiful for me." This was for her too. The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Maya walked onto the stage and the applause washed over her like a wave. She bowed slightly, then sat at the beautiful concert grand piano positioned in the spotlight. Before she began, she spoke into the microphone that had been set up. She hadn't planned to speak, but suddenly it felt necessary. "My father died when I was 4 years old," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I barely remember him, but through his music I've gotten to know him. These pieces I'm about to play, he wrote them years ago. No one's ever heard them before tonight. Some of them he wrote while my mother was pregnant with me. Some he wrote in the months after I was born." She paused, looking out at the dark audience. "A year ago I was homeless. I was hungry and alone, and I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. I stood outside a restaurant and asked if I could play piano in exchange for food. And someone said yes. Someone gave me a chance." Maya's eyes found Mrs. Romano in the front row. "This concert isn't just about my father's music, though. That's what you'll hear tonight. It's also about the people who see potential in others when the rest of the world sees nothing. It's about second chances. It's about the music that lives inside all of us, waiting for the courage to come out." She turned to the piano. "This first piece is called For Tomorrow. My father wrote it 2 months before he died. I think he knew somehow that his tomorrow might not come, but he wanted to leave something behind that said he believed in tomorrow anyway, that he believed in hope even when things seemed dark." Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The music filled the hall, rich and complex. All those months of training showed in every note. Her technique was flawless now, but she hadn't lost the emotion that made her playing special. If anything, the technical mastery gave her more tools to express what she felt. She played through all 6 of her father's compositions, one after another, with only brief pauses between. Each piece told a different story. Joy, sorrow, wonder, fear, love. All the human emotions woven into melody and harmony. The audience was completely silent, except for occasional quiet sniffles. People were crying, moved by music they'd never heard before, written by a man they'd never met, played by a girl who'd survived more in her 16 years than most people faced in a lifetime. When Maya played the final notes of the last piece, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then the entire audience stood. The applause was deafening. People were cheering, crying, standing on their feet in appreciation. Maya stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Mrs. Romano, who was clapping with tears on her cheeks, at Richard, who was openly sobbing, at Professor Rodriguez, who actually smiled wide this time, looking proud, at Tony and the restaurant staff all on their feet, applauding wildly. She'd done it. She'd brought her father's music to the world. After the concert, there was a small reception. Journalists wanted interviews. Music critics who'd attended wanted to discuss the pieces. Several people from record labels approached with business cards. But the moment Maya treasured most was when a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, approached her nervously. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but I had to tell you something. 2 years ago, I dropped out of music school. I was homeless for a while. I thought my life was over. Tonight, hearing your story, hearing you play, it made me believe maybe I could try again. Maybe it's not too late for me. Maya took both of the woman's hands in hers. It's not too late. It's never too late. Do you play an instrument? Violin, the woman said quietly. Maya pulled out a business card. On it was information for a foundation she'd started just last week, using part of her inheritance, the David and Linda Chen Foundation, named for both her parents. Its purpose was to help young musicians who were facing homelessness or poverty. Come see us, Maya said. We're just getting started, but we have a space now. Practice rooms, instruments, teachers who volunteer their time, and we're working on getting housing set up too. Let us help you the way people helped me. The woman stared at the card, tears filling her eyes. Are you serious? Completely serious. Talent is everywhere. It's opportunity that's rare. And if I can give someone else the opportunity I was given, then everything I went through actually means something. Later that night, back in her apartment, Maya sat on her bed with her father's photograph. The same creased, faded picture she'd carried in her backpack when she had nothing else. We did it, Dad, she whispered. People heard your music. They loved it. And I didn't just survive. I actually made something good happen. She thought about that desperate, hungry girl from a year ago, the one who'd been mocked and dismissed, the one who'd almost given up. If she could talk to that version of herself, what would she say? Probably just this: keep going. Keep playing. Keep believing that somewhere in this hard world, there's someone waiting to open a door for you. And when you get through that door, when you finally find your footing, turn around and open doors for others. The next morning, Maya woke to her phone buzzing with messages. The concert reviews were out and they were incredible. A revelation. Astonishing debut. David Chen's legacy lives on through his extraordinarily talented daughter. But the message that made her smile most was from Mrs. Romano, breakfast at Giovanni's. We should celebrate and discuss which nights you want to keep playing for us. You'll always have a home here. Maya got dressed and headed downstairs. As she walked through the restaurant to Mrs. Romano's table, she passed the piano where it had all began. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, remembering, from nothing to something, from invisible to seen, from hungry to fed, from homeless to home, from forgotten to remembered, all because she'd been brave enough to ask one simple question. Can I play and swap for food? And someone had said yes. Sometimes that's all it takes. One yes, one chance, one moment when someone sees you not for what you look like, but for what's inside you waiting to emerge. Maya sat down with Mrs. Romano, accepted a plate of warm pastries, and started planning her next concert. There was so much more music to play, so many more doors to open. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning.